and welcome to episode 6 of the BOBCAST Patreon Bob World Builder podcast. Still figuring out how to say that title. Today, we're talking about problematic player behaviors.
Not problem players. Because just because your player is doing something problematic doesn't mean the person is a problem, necessarily. Unless some of this behavior comes out of game, like they're actively fist fighting other players, then that person also is a problem.
True player versus player.
Yes,
problem.
true PvP.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that distinction because I feel like on a lot of videos and things that I've seen about this, it's always literally labeled as problem players, etc., etc. And it just seems like you don't have to label a person as a problem when they're just doing something that they probably don't even notice most of the time.
They probably don't even know.
So before we even get into the first one, we can just kind of say like the number one solution to most of these things is just to privately, out of the game, tell that person what they're doing. Because it's probably just something they really don't see as a problem. And the number one reason that they might not see it as a problem is the number one thing that I think people are called out for. And it is the classic, that's what my character would do.
Yeah. So you made a character that would do that. You were in control of creating the character, and then you made that character do that thing. That's on you, not on the character.
Yeah. Unless your DM handed you the character sheet with personality traits that explicitly state they're a jerk.
Yeah, I mean, it's only really a problem when that thing is not.
Because that's the whole game, right? The whole game is all of us playing. That's what my character would do.
Yeah.
That's what role-playing is. So just that line itself might be a little problematic. But one funny tale that we had about this was one of our very few Adventurers League sessions at our current friendly local game store, where we were playing some Ghosts of Saltmarsh, and one of the characters in our party was playing a pretty, I guess, stereotypical...
Standard Goliath barbarian.
Yeah.
You know the type.
Well, yeah, just like straight up very grog-like, I guess was the idea.
It was just grog.
Yeah. So,
but bad.
And you remember this better than I do. So do you want to talk about what happened?
Yeah, so this Grog Jr. basically took this character from like their regular Adventures League game because we were playing on a free RPG day, so they just like did a bunch of extra slots to play Saltmarsh with some randos like us.
Mm-hmm.
So this person was a regular, and they just brought their Grog 2 into the Saltmarsh game, and the DM basically said, okay, you're suddenly teleported onto this boat. And this character was like, whoa, where am I? I need to get back to where I was because I'm dumb, I guess. And then he jumped off the boat and started swimming back to shore.
Yeah.
So we had to, like, get that person back on the boat.
Yeah. For the sake of themselves having, like, a sense of a cohesive story between their typical session and this one-shot, which is, like, all it was, they just kind of derailed the first, like, 20 minutes of our actual playtime. So that was kind of a moment where, like, your one silly decision ended up just wasting some time for everybody. And, it could have been kind of funny. I guess it was funny at first when they suggested it. But then when we realized, like, oh, like, your character's actually doing it. But point is, it just kind of, like, ended up wasting the party's time. I guess that's more of an example that's probably more common than, like, straight up ruining other people's fun. Is just kind of wasting people's time because our game time is very precious. It is limited. And to just do a little move like that that's not going to add to the experience of the party and is, in fact, going to take away from it is one of the biggest, behavioral issues you could have at the table.
Yeah. And, that was kind of a quest blocker, which is one of our other examples.
Yeah.
When you have a character who actively prevents adventure.
Yeah.
Basically. You have a character who just wants to sit in the tavern all day and get drunk.
Well, the worst that I know is like that if you basically create a character that is just like lone wolf sense of like, I work alone. What do I have at stake here to get involved in this situation or to help these people?
The working alone thing doesn't necessarily prevent other players from going on an adventure. It's like, oh, okay, you work alone? All right, bye.
Right. So, I mean,
have fun
it doesn't...
by yourself.
Yeah, and then if anything, it's kind of more of the time waster thing where then they're like, oh, wait, what? And then they'll just have to, like, come up with something, which is fine.
The more extreme version of this where this person is, a murder hobo and just kills every quest lead that you got.
That's also reminding me of another one we wanted to bring up here, what we've termed the Leroy Jenkins, who is somebody who's just going to act way too quickly before anybody else in your group really has a chance to decide like what's going on and like provide something to the situation. You might all be in that planning phase and then they're just like, okay, no, I'm going to do this. And it happens to be something,
Usually it happens before the planning phase is even entered. There is no planning, and Leroy Jenkins says, before anyone even checks to see if the door is locked, says, I break down the door.
Yeah.
It's like, no one's even touched the doorknob yet.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, like, specifically of that, like, murder hobo who might just kill the quest giver, or any NPC who just could have valuable information or something. Anybody who's just kind of randomly killing NPCs, that's kind of a separate issue, too, than even just this.
Thing.
That's, like, way more extreme, because that's just... Like, you need to play some video games for a while where you can just kill anybody and then come back to this game where interacting with people is most of the game. Interacting in a non-instantly killing them way.
Yeah. Or, other Leroy Jenkins behavior to go out of your way to avoid interacting with NPCs in any way, such as our example for this one. I don't know, it was fun as it was happening.
Oh yeah.
But so we're playing
Rime of the Frost
Maiden right now, and we're trying to rehome some kobolds. So
They know.
Yeah, they know.
Probably if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably watching my videos and therefore know that these guys just got the kobolds out of the mine. Well, they're still chilling in the mine in Tourmaline, and the party is trying to find them a home in Lonelywood where there happens to be an inn available.
Yeah, so we went to Lonelywood, and we were just like walking through town. We went down to the docks or whatever, and we wanted to find out what the local attitude is towards kobolds. So instead of, walking up and asking somebody or a group of people, one of our players says, I want to create the illusion of a kobold walking out of the alleyway.
Right.
So first of all, we were like...
Well, yeah, because he wanted to use minor illusion,
right,
which was a big issue.
Yeah, you can't create a creature with minor illusion, but you can create an object.
So as DM on the fly, I was like, well, you can make like a 2D cardboard cutout of a kobold, which the player went along with.
Yeah, but we had walked away from the alley at this point. So instead, the cardboard cutout of the kobold emerged from the ocean.
From Lake Merdwalden, on the shore of which were a few NPCs just kind of talking amongst themselves.
Yes, so without creating a ripple or a sound,
right.
This two-dimensional kobold rises out of the lake and floats toward the shore. All the citizens are like freaked out by this, like, what the fuck?
Naturally so.
What's happening? So they like started drawing weapons, and then like one guy stopped them. And so my character, who really just wanted to ask someone,
right,
like, are there any kobolds around here? Just walks over and says, "Hark, a kobold. How do you guys feel about that?" And in the end, they were like, "You could have just asked us." And I said, "I wanted to." And made a look back at our sorcerer friend.
Yeah. The main solution to the Leroy Jenkins of the party is just to establish a pattern of okay, situation arises, we discuss as a group, and then we decide on a mode of action, I guess, before you get back into whatever you're doing. Because just saying like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then it happens to be a thing that will kind of spoil that moment for everybody, where like the moment is lost. Like, yeah, in this case, you were able to pretty much just ask them afterward, but it gave them this super weird first impression of you guys, which then led to some other interesting things happening, which we'll probably touch on pretty soon.
I mean, we can touch on that right now, since we're already talking about it.
Yeah, let's just do it. That would be related to metagaming, I guess, here.
Yeah.
Where specifically a player might be trying to interact in a scenario that their character is not actually present. So if you never split the party, this might not be a thing you run into, but this is usually going to be a social situation where, say, like, oh, 2 people wanted to go to the blacksmith and 2 people wanted to go to the magic item shop. Then one character's shopping through these magic items, whatever, talking to the shopkeeper, and somebody else, another player jumps into the situation and is like, oh, well, do they have any of this? And it's like, well, hold on. You're not there.
Yeah. It's much worse, in my opinion, during role-playing moments where, a character is trying to have a moment with another character or an NPC, and then this other person who's not there is like, well, I want to ask blah, blah, blah. What if that was like an important story moment and it was dramatic, and then this character just like falls out of the ceiling and is like, I cast my prestidigitation and I turn everyone green. That's more chaotic behavior, but
And so this one specifically, this moment was literally like 10 minutes later in that session where the party proceeded to just try to break into this abandoned inn.
Honestly, we didn't think anyone would care.
Right. I mean, you saw it was all locked up and stuff. There was like an old notice posted on the door. Yeah,
but it was like a bandit town, so we're like, I bet people do this all the time.
Maybe. I mean, that was the assumption, I guess. But they spent a little while trying to break into this place, which was just on like a street. And there's not a lot of people out and about in Icewind Dale and any of the 10 towns necessarily. But after being there for several minutes, struggling to... And eventually realizing, like, okay, we can use this crowbar, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, no, here's what had happened. Mr. Leroy Jenkins
let's use that.
Misty stepped himself into the building, effectively locking himself inside because it was locked with a padlock, and he had the crowbar.
Yeah.
And there was no way to pass the crowbar back outside to us who were stuck outside.
Yeah. So he ended up having to smash the door a little bit. One of the boards broke, and you could pass it through.
Yeah.
But at this point, after, kind of several minutes of figuring that out, an NPC sees you guys just like breaking into this building, and it was silly, They were just like, "Hey, like, what are you doing?
Stop that!"
Yeah, like, I'm gonna get somebody. Don't move. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, and I was like, "No, it's okay. We're allowed to do this."
Right. I didn't know I couldn't do that. Yeah, it just kind of led to this goofy situation. But then the player the character, there we go again, inside the building, was trying to talk with this NPC.
Right, and he was stuck inside, and we hadn't, gotten in there yet.
Like, barely able to poke his head through, like, this gap where the board fell that they could fit a crowbar through, but, like...
Right, and it wasn't like the guy was, like, right there with us. He was still, like, down a ways.
Yeah, kind of closer to the shoreline. That can sometimes be, a little DM oversight where maybe you're not clearly explaining where everything's at. But if the majority of the party gets it, and then one player is still like, no, like trying to butt into a situation, the simple solution there is just to basically interrupt them, favoring the characters who are actually in the situation, just to redirect the conversation. And if it becomes a thing that's way too common, that's another situation where just talking to that player outside of the game is probably going to be your best solution. This could just be a player who's talking over other people too much. And a lot of times that can just be out of excitement, as it usually is for my Leroy Jenkinsy good friend who we play with.
He is generally fun to play with. It's just, he's a fast guy.
Yeah, he thinks very quickly and usually has something funny to like improv in a situation and just wants to like be the first one to do it.
I found it exhausting as a DM, but I'm finding it delightful as a player this time. Last time, my character just wasn't as easygoing. But knowing that, I created a much more adaptable character.
True. True. Yeah, sometimes it might involve some character creation maneuvering on your part to accommodate a player who you know that their play style is not going to jive with yours necessarily, or with a character you might have wanted to play. So you can also compromise a little bit and try to create a character that's going to just have more fun with that typical style that might be
rigid?
Yeah. And so back to this note quickly of that's what my character would do. We didn't exactly touch on our listed solution for that, which is especially if you have a character who is maybe super lawful, because that's a situation where that's what my character could do, comes up a lot. Maybe super chaotic, where they are going to be jumping into situations all the time or just doing something right off the bat before anybody else has a say. Basically having what we called a planned redemption for that character, where from the get-go, like, okay, you make this character who's kind of crazy and going to do whatever they want to do, but you have a path in mind for how they're going to turn around, basically.
Yes. I created a character for Ghosts of Saltmarsh that is evil, does want to eat your brain,
yeah,
and will probably die for it. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I guess just understanding the consequences is like the biggest piece of it on the player's side of that. I'm thinking we could go to the anti-gamer, which is a player who's going to design a character that they know. It's kind of like a min-maxer, basically, where they want to create a character who can like either do something very specifically very well, or maybe it's to do a lot of things very well. And the problem with this is it's basically like manipulating the game to remove a lot of the challenges that are supposed to be fun.
Yeah. The question is, when you're creating a character that's really good at one thing, or you find some ability you have that will just eliminate something that you're facing right now, is that fun for everybody else at the table? And I mean everybody, including your DM.
Yeah.
DMs are a player. DMs are trying to challenge you. If you come up with some kind of loophole that eliminates a challenge that maybe they've worked hard on, and maybe technically you had to rules lawyer a little bit and finagle that loophole,
yeah,
that's not fun.
Yeah. And so two of the stories we had about this, both involve our Mr. Leroy Jenkins, who might start sounding like a bad guy here, but he's so not. He's super fun to play with. Point is...
And this example is partially my fault because it was a rules misunderstanding and I was the DM. Right.
So, and this one specifically, some of you guys might know about, involves the Conjure Fae spell, if I labeled this correctly. The one where basically you can like summon a bunch of pixies or something, and then they have a bunch of spells like polymorph that can basically allow your party to all become, in our case, like giant gorillas or T-Rexes or something crazy. And it can kind of quickly just get around a situation that the DM thought was going to be something big and challenging.
Yeah, like a dragon. But anyway, the problem with that was the Conjure Fae spell, or Conjure Woodland Beings.
Oh, that's it, actually. Yeah.
That allows the DM to select the creature that is summoned.
This is just a little PSA about this spell, I guess. Yeah. And so the part of the solution here is double checking the rules. You know, as a DM, like, you shouldn't necessarily have to do that. You want to be able to trust all your players. I, most of the time, will just kind of go along with what my players tell me the rule is if I don't know it, just to keep the game moving. But you can always pause and double check, or just make a note if it seemed crazy and then check it after the session. And if it is something crazy that you think might not be fun in the future, because there are certainly rules in the game that aren't going to be fun for your players, your table, whatever, try to find some kind of compromise where the player can still do their cool thing, but it's going to work in a way that's fun for them and everybody else.
For example, if you have the ability to turn into a small lizard and explore the entire dungeon in an hour, should you? Bob says yes. I say maybe in moderation.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately I agree moderation is the key there. Yeah, we don't have to get into that whole thing.
But, you know, maybe there's a cool magic item hidden somewhere for you.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna end up missing out on cool, like, loot that could have been dropped or, like, secrets that just weren't visible to that little creature.
If you're using this basically to avoid any kind of story or NPC interaction, you're not going to learn anything.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a dungeon and you see an NPC, you're like, oh, enemy. Maybe it's not an enemy.
True. Yeah. And so to jump to our next one that's kind of connected to this, though, is just about what I labeled here as being a good sport. Whether you're the DM or a player, a lot of the times you're going to end up in situations where, of course, your players do something really unexpected like that. Or, in my off the top of my head example was like creating some kind of puzzle that your players figure out super quickly. You know, you might be tempted to try to improvise something so that, okay, to keep them working on this a little longer. And then you're trying to like scramble and find out what the real solution should be now because they figured it out way too quickly. Ultimately, that's probably not going to lead to a fun situation. And instead, you should be rewarding them for figuring out whatever it was. And from, I guess, the player perspective, you need to expect to be challenged, even though you're like a superhero in D&D. Because like I recently had a super bad example of this where we were like really challenged by a super powerful being, but I just got really bummed out about it and then let myself get super distracted from the game, and it ended up kind of like spoiling the fun.
Yeah, players can't be treating every challenge like an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And likewise, DMs, if your players leap over your obstacle, you don't raise that bar so it hits them in the crotch on the way over.
Basically, this also involves like compromise and just like leaning into the game rather than being like, man, this isn't fun. Anyway, last one is really just when the fun in your game might just kind of be like burning out. Maybe your campaign's been going on a long time. Maybe it's only been a few sessions, but a player basically gets to a point where they're just not having fun being the character that they were so excited about a few sessions ago, right? And this happened in one of our first campaigns. People in our party, this is not Leroy Jenkins, even though he was in this game.
Leroy Jenkins was having a great time.
As usual, right?
Yeah.
that's the MO of Leroy.
The problem is that sometimes when Leroy Jenkins is having a great time, other more serious players are not having a great time.
And it is an issue probably of sincerity, because Leroy Jenkins is just like 100% fun, kind of 0% like drama.
Well, the other person was 100% drama.
Yeah, 0% comedy. So it led to this player basically just not being happy with their character and kind of didn't own up to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had created a character that just like isn't that fun of a class option in the first place. But, you know, she had an interesting story behind it that involved another player, and then that other player kind of wasn't, you know, taking the drama of it very seriously either, and it really like ruined the arc for her, I think. But when I asked her if she wanted to change, which I asked her several times, she would always say no. But I could tell in every battle that we were in, you know, she was playing a fighter.
Yeah.
And she's just like, okay, I sword with my sword.
Yeah.
You know?
That's it.
And she was a cavalier, so, you know, that's pretty much all you can do if you don't have a horse.
Right.
Which she didn't have because
we were in a big dungeon.
Yeah. All the time in a big dungeon.
Yeah.
Prince of the Apocalypse.
Point is,
never mind.
We just called this one the sunk cost, where basically, you've invested a lot into creating this character who you thought was going to be really fun, and maybe it was fun for a while. They're part of the party. They're part of this campaign, the story you've been building, and you just don't want to give it up, even though you probably would have a lot more fun just trying something new. So the solution here, you know, if you're the DM or another player seeing somebody doing this, to suggest some changes for them, whether that means a whole new character or just maybe swapping out some abilities, maybe changing a subclass or something.
Sometimes it means taking them by the arm and shoving a finger in their face saying, I know you're not having a good time. You better do something about it.
I do not condone this. Bob World Builder legal. Anyway, but yeah, and it doesn't have to be like a permanent change. It could just be like, okay, next session, try out this little thing.
Yeah.
And then see how it goes. I feel like it all comes down to compromising what people want so everybody can still have fun. And sometimes, you know, there will be times where maybe you're with a player who their idea of fun just really isn't going to jive with another person in the group or a few people in the group. And not every group is going to be perfect together. These are problematic behaviors, not players. So be willing to compromise. Try to make sure everybody's having fun, including the DM. Sometimes especially the DM, because if the DM's not having fun, then nobody gets to have fun if they don't want to run anymore.
Yeah, and then you get rocks fall, everyone dies.
Yeah. So, have fun. Keep building.
Or else.